The earth lay parched, split like shattered china under a boundless sky. A faint breeze stirred through brittle grass, bearing the aroma of dust, faded grief, and something ancient, long unspoken. Clara Hayes adjusted her weathered straw hat, brushing sweat from her forehead. She'd risen before dawn, grappling with a splintered fence post and praying the dwindling well water would last until morning. Little remained, of water, of her savings, of her resolve. Yet the ranch was her only anchor now. Her husband had passed the previous winter, struck down by a fever no physician could diagnose, no pastor could ease. Ash Valley's townsfolk buried him swiftly, their memories of him fading faster still. They regarded Clara with weary glances, the kind reserved for women who defied their place, too young to be widowed, too defiant to wed again. She lived a mile beyond the mesquite trees, where only the bold or the desperate carved out homes. Most days, Clara wasn't certain which she was. The wind shifted. A vulture wheeled lazily above, its circles slow and wide. Then she saw him. At first, she mistook it for a pile of discarded blankets left by passers-by. But as she neared the ridge behind her barn, her breath caught. A man lay curled on his side, his chest barely rising. Blood soaked the ground beneath him, dark and crusted like rusted iron. His long black hair was matted with dirt. He wore no boots, only a deer-hide shirt, torn at the shoulder to reveal a gash deep enough to expose bone. Then she noticed the necklace, beads, and a feather. Apache. Her pulse thundered. Every tale from her childhood surged forward. Stories of raids, torched homesteads, children snatched under moonlight, warnings murmured in church, venom hissed in taverns. She stepped back, then again. But he stirred, not with menace, not with force, just a faint, pained moan as he tried, and failed, to raise his head. He was dying, and not slowly. Clara scanned the horizon. Empty. The road lay silent. The town wouldn't send aid. They'd care little if an Apache bled out into the dirt. She should have turned away. She knew it. Instead, she strode back to the barn. Moments later, she returned with a battered tin cup, filled with precious, nearly depleted well water, and knelt beside the man who might kill her if he survived. She didn't speak, didn't ask his name. She gently lifted his head and pressed the cup to his lips. At first, he didn't drink. His eyes fluttered open, dark, untamed, unreadable, locking onto hers. Still, she waited. Then, slowly, his lips parted. He took a sip, just enough. When he finished, she set the cup aside and stood, trembling. For a moment, she feared he'd seize her wrist, speak, or curse her in a tongue she couldn't grasp. Instead, he held her gaze for a long moment, then closed his eyes and exhaled, almost with relief. Clara returned to the house, uncertain whether she'd saved a life or beckoned death to her doorstep. That night, sleep eluded her. Before the sun could climb the canyon hills, thunder rumbled, not from the sky, but from the earth. Dozens of hooves, dozens of warriors, all converging on her ranch. The sun had scarcely breached the hills when Clara heard them. The ground quaked before she saw them. Dozens of riders, shadowed against the amber dawn, their forms rising like specters from the horizon. Horses moved in precise formation, swift and silent. No dust, no cries, only the relentless drum of hooves closing in, a pulse growing louder. She froze on the porch, one hand clutching her husband's old rifle. It wasn't loaded. She didn't know how to shoot it, but it steadied her, made her feel less exposed. The first rider emerged past the corral, then another, then more. In moments, the ranch was encircled, warriors on all sides, their faces etched with quiet fury, feathers swaying in the breeze. No one shouted, No one raised a weapon, but their presence was a warning. Then she saw him, the wounded man. He rode at the forefront, upright but pale, blood still staining his sleeve. He dismounted slowly, his gaze never leaving hers. The others held back. Clara swallowed, her throat tight, not daring to speak. He limped toward her, quiet, a strange grace in his pain. When he stopped a few feet away, the morning breeze lifted his hair, revealing a young face, perhaps early 30s, weathered, a scar slicing across his jaw. His dark, sharp eyes held no anger, only something deeper, older. He raised one arm and spoke a single word she didn't understand. The other riders remained still. He turned to them, adding something in Apache, words she couldn't decipher. Whatever he said shifted everything. Weapons lowered, expressions softened, a few men nodded. Then, as swiftly as they'd come, the warriors began to withdraw, some glancing back, others not. All but one. The wounded man stayed. Without a word, he walked past her to the barn and sat in the shade by the water trough. He didn't look at her again, just leaned against the post, as if he'd always belonged there. Clara stood rooted, time stretching endlessly. The town would never believe this. They'd call her cursed, or worse, a traitor. She could already hear their whispers, that widow's lost her mind, harboring a savage. They'll slit her throat and burn her land. But no one had harmed her, and nothing had burned. She approached him, still gripping the empty rifle. "You shouldn't be here," she said softly. "They'll come looking. The sheriff, the town." He opened his eyes, silent. "I gave you water," she pressed, "not shelter. Not this." Still no reply, only a faint glint in his gaze, amusement or defiance. "Do you understand me?" she asked. His voice, when it came, was low, rough, accented. "You saved. I protect." Clara blinked. "You protect." He nodded once. "Until you are safe." It was so final, so certain. She stared, heart pounding, then muttered, "You're as stubborn as every man I've ever known." He almost smiled. Almost. By noon, the ranch was quiet again. The warriors had vanished, leaving only hoofprints and dust. The man, whose name she still didn't know, stayed near the barn, speaking little, watching the horizon like a sentinel awaiting a command. He asked for nothing, not food, not aid. Yet he fixed the fence post she'd struggled with, chopped wood for her fire, drew water from the well. His wound still oozed through the bandage she'd applied the night before. Each time she urged him to rest, he repeated, "You gave. I return." By evening, Clara set 2 plates on the porch table, one for her, one for him. He nodded, but waited until she took her first bite before touching his food. That night, as she extinguished the lantern, she glanced out the window. He sat beneath the stars, keeping watch, not as a guest, not as a captive, but as a shadow of something she couldn't yet name, something that felt like safety. 2 nights passed. No one from Ash Valley came. No one asked about the warriors. No one checked on the widow who'd lived too long alone. The silence was almost more menacing than noise. But Clara felt a shift deep in her bones. Something was changing. Each morning, the Apache man, who still hadn't shared his name, rose before dawn. He tended the fire, brushed the horses. His limp lessened, though the bandage on his shoulder stayed tight. She offered to change it. He refused, touching the feathers at his neck. Wound must stay, so they remember. Pain teaches. It was the longest he'd spoken. By now, Clara had stopped asking him to leave. His presence felt not just safe, but vital, as if the ranch itself breathed easier with him there. He never entered the house, never asked why she lived alone, never touched her. But she noticed small things. A rabbit, cleaned and left by her door. A broken barn drawer quietly repaired, her boots polished. acts no one had done for her since Samuel died. On the third morning, she rode to town for flour and coffee. The general store fell silent the moment she entered. 3 men stood by the counter, ranchers, hardened and bitter. Their eyes slid to her. "Back from your secret war camp, Clara?" One spat. She ignored him, grabbing a sack of flour. Another muttered, "Heard you're keeping one of them out there. Feeding him. Sleeping with him." The words cut, but she didn't flinch until Sheriff Carson stepped from behind the counter. He wasn't cruel, but he wasn't courageous. Wiping his glasses, he said, "Miss Hayes, we've had reports." "Reports," she echoed flatly. "Or gossip?" His jaw tightened. "You know tensions are high. Folks don't take kindly to harboring enemies." "He's not an enemy. He was wounded. I gave him water." A rancher laughed. "That's what you call it now." Carson raised a hand. "Enough. Clara, just be careful. People are nervous." She left without the coffee. That night, she sat on the porch, arms crossed, staring into the dusk. The Apache warrior sat nearby, sharpening a small knife with a stone. He didn't look up, but she sensed his attention shift. "They think I'm a traitor," she said. He paused. "They think I'm sleeping with you." Silence. She glared. "You're not going to say anything?" He tilted his head, considering. "Words are smoke." She almost laughed. "Easy for you to say. You're not the one they'll run out of town." He paused. "You gave water to a dying man. That is not shame. That is root." She frowned. "Root?" He nodded. "In my people, a woman who gives water gives life, not just to body, to spirit. You gave what cannot be repaid." Silence stretched between them. Then, softly, she whispered, "You speak like someone who's lost more than blood." His eyes darkened. He returned to his blade. She didn't press. That night, after the lantern dimmed, Clara woke to a sound. Wood splintering, voices outside, a scream cut short. She leapt from bed, peering through the window. 5 men, lanterns, guns. They'd come in the dead of night. They'd come for her. One kicked the barn door open. Another shouted, "You in there, red lover? Come out." She grabbed the rifle, still useless, but clutched it tightly. The front door burst open. Then a shadow moved, faster than any man, a blur of bone and blade. A scream, another. A man fell, then another. In less than a minute, the yard was still. Clara stood frozen in the doorway, breath ragged. The Apache man stood by the fence, breathing hard, his knife wet with blood. 4 men lay groaning on the ground. The 5th had fled into the dark. He turned to her. "I stay," he said simply, "until all danger sleeps." Shaken, heart racing, eyes wide, she nodded once. For the first time since Samuel died, she didn't want to be alone. By morning, the injured men were gone. Clara didn't ask where he'd taken them or how none had died despite the blood. She'd seen his movement, like a tempest cloaked in silence, and suspected death had brushed close, then been spared. Mercy, perhaps, or a message. Word spread quickly. By midday, the town hummed with rumors. Sheriff Carson rode up with 2 deputies, halting just shy of her fence. Clara met him on the porch, her hands trembling beneath her shawl. "We heard there was an attack," Carson said, removing his hat. "You all right?" "I'm alive," she said plainly. He glanced at the barn. Was it true? Were they after him? She didn't answer. "Clara, I can't protect you if you don't. I never asked you to protect me," she snapped. A pause. The wind stirred the dust at their feet. A deputy spat. "She's hiding a savage. That's what this is." They were protecting the town. Clara stepped forward. "They broke into my home in the dead of night. You call that protection?" Carson raised a hand to calm the tension, but the deputy's glare hardened. "You're putting us all at risk. Them Apache turn on you fast." Then, from behind the barn, a shadow moved. He was there, the warrior, no weapon, No threat, just his silent presence. It was enough to make the deputies reach for their holsters. "Stand down," Carson barked. The air thickened. Time stalled. Slowly, the Apache man raised both hands and stepped back, vanishing into the shadows. Carson looked at Clara. "You've got to choose, Clara. The town or him. You can't have both." She didn't flinch. "I never asked for either." The sheriff left, heavy-hearted, but the deputy rode off with fire in his eyes. That evening, Clara sat by the fire, arms wrapped tightly around herself. "You shouldn't have come out," she told him. "You're just giving them more reasons." He stirred the flames with a stick. "They do not need reasons, only excuses." She stared into the fire. "I used to believe this land was home. Now I'm not sure it was ever mine." He looked at her, his face softened by firelight. "Home is not a place. It is a choice. And if I chose wrong," she whispered. He was silent for a long time, then said, "Then we fight for it." The next day, the church doors slammed shut as she approached. Mothers clutched their children. The preacher turned away. Outside the saloon, men fell silent as she passed. One muttered, "Witch." Another threw a stone. It struck her shoulder, bruising deeply. She didn't cry, didn't pause. That night, she returned home and found a small woven charm on her porch, straw and feathers, Apache protection. She looked into the darkness, knowing he was near, watching, not because he owed her, but because something had shifted. A thread, invisible but strong, had tied them that day by the well, growing tighter with every threat from the town. The wind howled that night, as if it had a message. Shutters rattled. The lantern flickered low. Clara lay awake, the echo of the stone pulsing in her shoulder. They would come again. She felt it in the house's bones. Outside, the barn stood cloaked in shadow. The warrior had spoken little since the sheriff's visit. He worked, he watched, but his eyes held a colder fire. He was waiting. So was she. At midnight, she heard it. Boots on wood. Low, mean whispers. She sat up. The chicken coop door slammed open, then screams, feathers flying. A torch was flung. Flames devoured the dry straw like a ravenous beast. Clara grabbed the rifle, still useless, and ran barefoot through the doorway. 4 men, masked, drunk on power. One held a branding iron, glowing red. Another held rope. The third was Grady. Of course, Grady, the man who owned half the town and hungered for the rest. Since Samuel died, he'd circled her ranch like a vulture, offering help laced with chains. "I warned you, Clara," he called. "Keep savages, you'll lose more than chickens." Before she could respond, the barn doors flew open. Nokona, not running, but walking, deliberate, calm, a predator in motion. Grady raised his gun, but Nokona was faster, a blur, a crack of bone. The man with the branding iron screamed as the weapon was wrenched from his hand and hurled into the dirt. One masked man fled, another fought and fell. Grady stood his ground, fury blazing in his eyes. "You think you can scare me?" Nokona stepped forward, blood dripping from his knuckles, and said one word, "Enough." Grady sneered. "You're lucky she's here, or I'd gut you." Clara stepped beside Nokona, leveling the rifle, trembling but steady. "Try it," she said. "See what happens." Grady's sneer wavered. "You wouldn't shoot me." She didn't blink. "I don't have to. He already spared you once." Nokona's silence was thunder. Grady spat into the dirt and turned. "This isn't over." "You're right," Clara replied. "It's just beginning." They doused the fire, saved what animals they could. By dawn, the yard reeked of ash and scorched feathers. Nokona's hands were torn. Clara bandaged them, sitting beside him on the porch as the sky burned orange. They didn't speak, but something thicker than smoke, stronger than silence, bound them. Blood on the fence, truth in the soil, a bond no war or whispers could break. Days grew hotter. Ash Valley turned silent toward her. No more stones, no more sheriff, only quiet. In many ways, that was worse. A town shouts in fear, but when it grows still, it schemes. Clara tried not to dwell on it. She tended her land, fed the surviving chickens, rebuilt the coop with hands that no longer shook. But her world had shifted, not just from fear. Nokona stayed. He didn't ask to stay, didn't speak much, but acted as if the land belonged to them both. Strangely, that no longer frightened her. He repaired the barn roof, sharpened her tools, set traps that caught rabbits without cruelty. They ate together, he always waiting for her first bite. He never sat too close, never lingered in the house. Always near enough to be felt, never near enough to be questioned. In that space between his words and his silence, something began to grow. One night, after supper, she found him by the fire, carving a small piece of wood under the ancient, blinking stars. She sat nearby, quiet. "What are you making?" she asked. He didn't look up. "Memory." "For who?" He paused. "You." She blinked. "Why?" He kept carving. "You gave me water. Then you gave me choice." She tilted her head. "What choice?" "To stay." She stared into the flames. "No one else would have. Not in your place." He glanced at her, just once. "You would." It wasn't flattery, it was truth. She smiled faintly. "I used to think kindness was weakness. Samuel, my husband, said it would get me killed." He didn't ask about Samuel, didn't offer pity, just waited. "He wasn't cruel," she continued, "just cold. Proper. He thought love was a duty, not something you showed." Nokona turned the carving. A bird, perhaps a hawk, wings spread. "And you?" he asked softly. She hesitated. "I thought I had to earn love. If I worked hard enough, smiled enough, stayed quiet enough, someone might find me worthy." He looked at the carving. "You were always worthy." The word struck like rain after drought. Her eyes burned. She didn't reply. The next morning, she found the carving on her windowsill. A hawk, smooth and strong, a black bead tied around its neck. She traced it, then tucked it into her pocket, near her heart. That day, she baked cornbread, real cornbread, with the last good flour, and brought it to him by the fence. They ate under the sun, no words needed. What lived between them didn't require language, built in silence, forged in fire, bound not by vows but by presence. The first time she touched him, it was unintentional. They were shifting a heavy beam from the barn roof. Her hand slipped. His fingers caught her wrist, steadying her. Calloused, firm, careful. She glanced at where his hand held hers, then at the long scar from his thumb to his elbow. "How did you get that?" she asked quietly. He released her. A pause. "I was 13. Soldiers came." She didn't move. "They said we stole cattle. We hadn't. They burned our crops, took my brother, set fire to our lodge." He looked past her, to something distant. "My mother pushed me out the back, told me to run. I didn't want to, but I did." He traced the scar. "A blade caught me as I escaped. I bled alone under a cedar tree for 3 days." Clara swallowed. "What happened to her?" His voice softened. "They killed her, left her in the ashes." She reached for the beam, hands trembling. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "You didn't do it. Doesn't mean I'm not sorry." He looked at her. "That is why I stay." She frowned. "Because I'm sorry?" "No," he said. "Because you remember what others choose to forget." That night, it rained, the first true rain in weeks. She stood on the porch, watching the sky open, soaking the land. The cracked earth drank greedily. Dust turned to mud. The roof leaked, but she didn't care. She turned to find him behind her, silent. "Do you miss them?" she asked over the thunder. "Your family?" He nodded. "I miss Samuel," she said. "But I also don't." He tilted his head. He kept me in a safe little box, told me what to wear, what to say, how to act. I think he loved the idea of me, not the woman I was. Nokona looked at the rain, then stepped into the storm. She watched him lift his face to the sky, letting the water wash over him like a blessing. He raised his arms slightly, a subtle, sacred gesture. She followed. Together, they stood in the mud, soaked, not speaking, not touching, just being. The storm felt not like chaos, but like cleansing, washing their pasts away, drop by drop. Later, by the fire, he unwrapped his shoulder bandage. The wound was nearly healed. She knelt, applying fresh salve from herbs and beeswax. She saw other scars, dozens, some old, some deep, one like an arrow's mark. She didn't ask. Instead, she said, "Every scar is a story, isn't it?" He nodded. "And every story leaves a mark." He met her gaze. "Some marks," he said, "lead us to those who can carry them with us." Her breath caught. Without intending it, she'd begun to carry his scars, and perhaps he'd started to carry hers. The storm passed, leaving more than puddles and fresh air. A stillness settled over the ranch, a peace Clara hadn't known in years. The land smelled new, the wind softened. Even the chickens clucked with ease. But peace never lingered in Ash Valley. One afternoon, cleaning an old chest in the loft, Samuel's chest, she found it. A letter, folded in a cracked envelope, stained with dust and time. Sitting on the wooden floor, lights slanting through the rafters, she read, "To Mr. Grady, as discussed, I agree to sell the property at the offered price. Once my wife is informed, I expect discretion until the paperwork is finalized. She's not ready to let go, but I am. Samuel Hayes." Her hands shook. The date was 3 weeks before Samuel died. He'd planned to sell the ranch to Grady behind her back, the same Grady who now sought to drive her out, who tried to burn her home. The air chilled. She read again, then again. Samuel had orchestrated it all, intending to take the money and leave her with nothing. She stood too quickly, knocking over the chest. Tools clattered. Nokona heard, entering through the barn doors, eyes alert. "Clara." She held up the letter, hand trembling. He was going to sell this place to Grady. Nokona took the paper, read it once. His face didn't change, but his eyes hardened. "You still have the land," he said. "For now," she replied, voice breaking. "If Grady has a copy, he'll come with papers, a judge, and I." Her voice cracked. "I thought Samuel loved this place. I thought he loved me." Nokona folded the letter and set it on the table. "He loved control," he said, "not land, not you." The words weren't cruel. They were liberating. That evening, Clara rode to town alone. She didn't tell Nokona, didn't seek permission. She wore her best dress, untouched since the funeral, and pinned her hair like the woman Ash Valley once admired. Let them stare. At the courthouse, she demanded to see Judge Harlan. The clerk hesitated. "You got business, Miss Hayes?" She showed the letter. He read, eyes widening. 10 minutes later, the judge met her in his office, a large man with thick glasses and a distaste for nonsense. She placed the letter on his desk. "This was never filed. My husband meant to sell, but he died before signing. Now Grady's trying to claim it through fear." The judge studied her. "You have proof of intimidation?" "I have ashes on my porch and scars on my fence." A long pause. "Let me look into it." Back at the ranch, Nokona waited. She handed him the letter. "It's not over," she said, "but I'm not running." He nodded. "Good." Then, without warning, she stepped closer, placed her hand on his chest, felt the steady rhythm of his breath. "I don't want to carry this alone anymore." His hand rose slowly, resting over hers. Not pulling, just holding. No kiss, no words. Only two souls, broken by different worlds, sharing a truth too sacred for speech. The next morning, she woke before dawn. Nokona was saddling the horses. He didn't ask if she was certain. She didn't admit her fear. They both knew. The air was heavy with heat, though the sun was low. A hawk's cry pierced the distance, sharp, like a warning. They rode side by side, past the broken fence, the burned coop, the blood-soaked earth. Clara didn't look back. She'd done that too often. In the town square, a crowd had gathered. Grady stood at the center, arms crossed, smug as a fox in a henhouse. His men flanked him, rough and ready. By the courthouse steps stood Judge Harlan. Clara dismounted, handed her reins to Nokona, and marched through the crowd, eyes fixed on the judge. Grady laughed. Well, look who's found her nerve. She ignored him. Judge, you said you checked the deed. Harlan nodded. I did. He held up a folder. Mr. Grady never filed a purchase contract. There's no legal transfer. The letter proves intent, not completion. Grady stepped forward, face darkening. We had a deal. You had a promise, the judge said sharply, from a man who's dead. That doesn't mean you own the land. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Grady's voice rose. She's lying. That paper could be forged. She's shacked up with an Apache, for God's sake. She'd do anything to keep that ranch. All eyes turned to Nokona. He stood calm, yet the crowd edged back. Except Grady. He drew a pistol. It happened fast, too fast for thought, but not for Nokona. He moved like a storm breaking. One step, two. Then he was between Clara and the gun. A shot rang out. Gasps, screams. The bullet missed, not by chance, but because Nokona had knocked Grady's arm aside with sledgehammer force, sending the pistol flying. Without a sound, he pinned Grady to the ground, one knee on his chest, one hand at his throat. No words, no hate, just pressure, enough to warn, not to kill. Harlan shouted, "Let him go." Nokona looked to Clara. She nodded. He stood. Grady gasped, humiliated before the town, but no one helped him. Not this time. Later, the judge handed her a signed paper. Your deed, he said. It's yours, legally, permanently. Clara took it with both hands. Thank you, she whispered. He glanced at Nokona. You might consider moving farther out, for safety. She nodded. We'll consider a lot of things. That night, back at the ranch, they didn't speak of the town, the gun, or the faces that had finally regarded them with weary respect. Instead, she brought out 2 cups of coffee. They sat under the stars, shoulders nearly touching. I thought I'd lose everything, she said. Nokona looked at her. You found something instead. She turned to him. What? He hesitated, then, with more courage than she'd ever seen, said, someone. Weeks passed. The sky cooled from summer's blaze to autumn's golden breath. The land softened under gentler winds. The cicadas fell silent. The once parched earth began to heal. And still, he stayed, not as a guest, not as a ghost, but as something in between. Nokona asked for nothing. He slept in the barn, even when she offered the spare room. He ate only what she shared, spoke little, but his presence became part of the ranch, like the hills, the windmill, constant, grounding. One evening, as Clara gathered laundry, she saw him by the well, staring at it, not drinking. She approached, her skirts brushing the dry grass. What is it? He didn't look up. This is where it began. She nodded. I was ready to die here, he said. And you gave me life. Her voice was soft. I didn't do much. He turned to her. You did everything. A long silence followed. Then he reached into his pocket, pulling out something wrapped in cloth. She unwrapped it, a necklace of bone and turquoise beads, threaded with a raven feather and a stone carved like a wave. It's beautiful, she whispered. What does it mean? He looked at the well. Water is more than survival to my people. It's spirit, memory, the bond between two lives. She traced the beads. And this stone, it means you are not alone. Her breath caught. I made it for you, he said, but only if you choose to wear it. She looked into his eyes, dark, steady, unflinching. I choose, she said. From that day, things shifted slowly, deliberately. The town still whispered, but some began to wave. An old woman brought eggs. A child left flowers by the fence. No apologies, no explanations, but kindness began to return. One afternoon, Sheriff Carson stopped by, hat in hand. Not here on business, he said. Just checking in. She offered coffee. He declined. The council voted. They're not pressing anything. Not now. She nodded. Thank you. He glanced at the barn, where Nokona mended a wheelbarrow. He ever leaving? Clara looked over her shoulder. Nokona worked, focused, hands steady. She smiled. He already has a place. Carson grunted, tipped his hat, and rode off. That night, under a star-strewn sky, the wind soughed through the grass. Clara sat by the fire with Nokona. She leaned her head against his shoulder. He didn't pull away. Do you ever miss the life you had before? She whispered. He was quiet, then said, yes. But this is something new. She nodded. Together, they listened to the wind, to the well's water shifting below, to the silence that now felt like home. Sometimes, the smallest acts hold the greatest power. A cup of water, a place to rest, a word unspoken but deeply felt. Clara's story reminds us that kindness carries risk, but also reward. That love doesn't always proclaim itself loudly. Sometimes it arrives quietly, endures through fire, and speaks through actions louder than words. If this story touched you, share your thoughts below. Have you ever risked something to do what was right? And don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more tales of strength, honor, and redemption.